The next trend that you identified, again, uh, broadly speaking, negative, was the trend of the proliferation of fake history, and in particular, the seemingly, or certainly I think it started as the acceptable face of this was as entertainment on, for example, the as you say, satirically named History Channel, in the form of things like Ancient Aliens. But also the trend that you've identified here includes the decline of respect for evidence and inappropriately understood evidence in the context of expertise as well. So, 5 minutes on the proliferation of fake history. I guess starting with TV shows.
Well, as I point out in the article that's coming out in Pipeline, we began the decade with Time Team, which is probably the most successful, process-driven, evidence-led piece of archaeological TV that's ever been put on screen, probably anywhere, certainly in the UK. The format's been exported to America, it's been exported to Australia. We end the decade with the most famous sort of history programs, and the most successful history programs on television, being things like Ancient Aliens, conspiracy-driven fake history like Hunting Hitler, like the was it the Lost Treasure of the Knights Templar or something, which began as a yeah. I mean,
Forbidden
you can real
history. Yeah.
Forbidden History. Well, Forbidden History
No, it's not. It's
slightly.
not.
We can.
It's not.
I'm not going to
It's
get. Look,
not.
I'm not. Look, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. We can go down that rabbit hole later. I just want to expand on the general point.
Okay.
But basically, I think in the decade in which we've been working together and watching this stuff, I think it's fair to say there has been a devaluation of evidence in historical storytelling, in historical outreach, for want of better words, in the particularly in the media, which has actually mirrored wider society, and because the same criticisms are levelled at politics. We've just had a general election in the United Kingdom where, on both sides, really, it was an evidence-free zone. Nobody was making arguments.
Well, actually, one of the notes that I made here in our preparation for this was the notion of the undermining of evidence in the guise of entertainment,
Yeah.
and the fragmentation of audiences. People can find the facts they want where they want them, and this certainly started in the realm of history. One of the places it started was in the realm of history,
Yeah.
because it was seen what's the word? Um,
Uncontroversial.
uncontroversial. I was going to say contravenable for some reason. Uncontroversial, uh, to say, oh well, maybe the pyramids were built by aliens because we were just playing around. But it's a seed that definitely grew into a mighty oak.
Well, and I think actually this isn't uncontroversial. It's not a victimless crime, and I'm
No.
using the word crime deliberately, because we've seen the way that history has been undermined has opened the fake history series about the Knights Templar, where they're the guardians of the Holy Grail and so on. It's fake history on one level. I mean, we've seen historical specials about it, the ongoing nonsense about Rennes le Chateau and so on.
And of course, there's the drama on history, Nightfall, as well.
Which was I was about to come to that.
Oh, sorry.
No, I mean you're right. You're right to raise it. Nightfall, if people haven't seen it, it's now in its second series. It deals with the downfall of the Knights Templar from their exit from Israel Palestine. To I think the series ends with the mass arrests and the burnings at the stake and all that, at least according to what I've seen. And they are the keepers of the Grail and so on. It's historical nonsense. But that plays directly to a political agenda on the alt-right, where we have mass murderers like Anders Breivik and the killer in New Zealand just 9 months ago, approaching a year ago now, in the shooter at the two New Zealand Christchurch mosques, who who cite things like the Knights Templar and the Crusades as a justification for their fight against the Great Replacement theory, where
Mm.
Christian civilization is being replaced by Islam and so on. Again, it's nonsense, but it's dangerous nonsense if it's in the wrong hands,
Well,
and if it's given credibility.
yeah, well, I agree. I agree, and I think an attendant issue, and I think we're going to do well to fit it in, just hit in this speck of sand here. But an attendant
Yeah,
issue is actually what we have seen in the past decade. I definitely recall with a heavy heart the closure of, for example, Oxford Ancestors.
yeah,
The fact that serious DNA work is less marketable than DNA work that has simple ancestry answers for people. When you look at the
Well, I noticed
adverts,
just yesterday there
hmm
was some disquiet being shown by our colleagues, some of our specialist colleagues on Twitter, that I think it's ITV in the UK are running a series about British identity, and one of the things they're saying is the place of DNA in identity, in
yeah,
British identity.
yeah,
This kind of identity-driven politics is really dangerous, and in fact we have. Again, on the far right of European politics, this loose organisation called Generation Identity, which is a white identitarian grouping, overtly so, and it's dangerous.
this is true. This is true. But I suppose just to tie off the scientific
Yeah,
point I was
go
making
on.
is the fact that unfortunately DNA ancestry companies essentially they know kind of what results you kind of want to have and they kind of deliver them to you in broad groupings like oh you are British and Irish
Yeah,
sometimes religious persuasions are linked with DNA and all these things are um, they have scientific basis, but they are essentially part of a trend that's seen people turning away from actually what science is doing and what it can tell us, and towards essentially, I suppose, where we began this element of this trend, a shopping market element of history. I
yeah,
like that. I will have that, and that will be part
yeah,
of me, and this kind of thing. So
yeah,
that's the broadly speaking the negative aspect of the trend, fake history and turning away from objective facts and this kind of thing. Um,
yeah,
but I guess the positive that we want to highlight here for the next 5 minutes or so is increasingly open practice in archaeology. We are part of this, in fact. The fact that we
mm,
are talking about this right now, right at the second, we're doing it, Andy. We're doing it. Um,
yeah.
is part of this trend. So in the past 10 years or so, uh, open access archaeology. 5 minutes if we can.
Well, I think open access is going to be one of the big arguments of the next decade too, because it's certainly grown in importance in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, it, the old models of publication and outreach and sharing of data have been completely undermined by the particularly the various platforms that are available on the internet, not just the written platforms like blogging and self-publication and so on, but also obviously platforms like the one we're on now,
Hmm.
where you can self-publish programming, which previously could only be done by a professional studio
Hmm.
uh, setup or a professional broadcaster. Now, obviously, there are downsides to that because anybody can do it, and as we've just been discussing, people who really shouldn't be doing it for the sake of the health of our society are doing it and probably doing it very, very effectively, unfortunately. Um, but it has spurred people like us and our colleagues
Hmm.
to say, actually, we need to grasp this. We need to go after the audiences where the audiences are, rather than where we want them to be, or where the traditional publishers want them to in academia, where they can pay subscriptions to paywall publications.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's to now that and so you have increasingly sophisticated opportunity material available freely.
Hmm.
Where our colleagues are publishing papers, are publishing detailed blogs, which are referenced often like an academic article.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but the difference being that anybody can access it anytime.
Incidentally, I published a whole paper on this year, a
Ah,
chapter in a book. Uh,
can you? link to it, or is it behind a paywall?
I can link to it. I made sure. It was one of the things I said. I would only do this if it was publicly accessible. So I can make the PDF accessible. I'll put a link below. But actually, in that, one of the things, one of the points in that chapter is this question of the fact that there is a double-edged sword. We are naming this as a positive that archaeologists are increasingly open, and for example, social media allows people to access the work of archaeologists with increasing ease. But one of the things that puts people off often as archaeologists is the perception that the field of play is too equal, that it's
Yeah.
difficult for someone, ostensibly difficult for someone to tell the difference between someone who is talking out of their behind and someone who's talking with actual expertise, because they're both on the same platform. So there is a potential risk, but I would say actually
Mm.
persistence and laying out your methodology, for example, is going to help with that
There are, yeah, and also, I
clarity.
mean, and I think we can also learn from the field of politics here,
Mm,
in that there are a number of very good websites. The BBC have published material on this, and other broadcasters, and also some academic bodies about how to recognise fake
mm,
news,
mm-hmm,
fake sites. For example, um, do people quote their qualifications? Do they use their real name? Is a good starter.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Do they quote their qualifications? Do they cite other authorities?
And also
Um,
do they cite them appropriately?
exactly.
One of the most infamous examples of people appealing to scientific authority but completely inappropriately that I have ever seen was in a book on archaeology where they were talking about aliens building something or other, and Einstein was quoted as a geologist. And this was just a passing comment Einstein must have made about geology at some point, but he was quoted because people recognized the name Einstein, and it was supporting the speculation, not the
Yeah,
hypothesis, but the speculation of the author. So we've got a little bit of
yeah.
time left. Anything else you want to say about social media,
Well,
Twitter, etc.?
just to recognise that the same applies in social media and Twitter to anywhere else in sort of political discourse.
Hmm.
Um, Beware of bots, beware of trolls who will deliberately set out to undermine a point of view that they don't like. It's common on the far right, particularly also the far left and the horseshoe principle of politics. They all come together at the top anyway. They use the same methods, and beware of particularly Facebook, and where the ads and the articles that appear in your feed are the ones that they're targeting you to read. They're not the ones that you would choose necessarily. They're the ones Google or Facebook think you want to read,
Hmm.
and sometimes even they're even paid for, and don't always make that clear.
Hmm.
So, look beyond what's simply put in front of you.
Do you know, on that note, a word that I recently learned that's
Mm.
definitely come about in the past decade in terms of common parlance is gaslighting.
Yes,
That's a key element of this as well, isn't it? And
yes.
I didn't know what it meant because I tend not to do it, and I didn't had no reason to know what it meant. But it's interesting how
Well, the grimmer way of describing that, for people who don't know, is coercive control.
yeah. Mm,
It's sort of feeding you a story from different angles constantly to make you question your own ideas and sanity, and take on the view of the person that's
well, and
doing the
also
controlling.
yeah, and dismiss reasonable counterpoints as well.
And just absolutely, yeah,
So
yeah.
it is, broadly speaking, a positive that archaeologists are more accessible than ever before on various
Undoubtedly
platforms,
positive.
but it is a
It
double-edged
should
sword.
it should have happened a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay.